The late evening light of Manhattan cast long shadows across the spacious Upper West Side apartment. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson River, the city glimmered with thousands of lights. Michael stood by the panoramic window, one hand resting against the cool glass. His reflection stared back at him, a tall, lean man in his late 30s with short dark hair. But his eyes were distant, focused somewhere beyond the twinkling lights outside. Behind him, the living room was bathed in a gentle golden glow from a standing lamp in the corner. It was usually Michael's favorite time of day, when the city grew quiet and he could savor a moment of peace with his family. But tonight was different. There was a tension in the air so thick it was almost tangible. On the plush beige sofa across the room sat Emily, his wife of 13 years. She wrung her hands nervously, fingers twisting the gold wedding band on her left hand. Emily's face was pale, her wavy brown hair falling loosely around her face as she looked down at her lap. She had been trying to find the right words for several minutes. The only sounds were the muffled honking of taxis far below and the quiet tick of the wall clock in the hallway. In the adjacent room, their daughters, 12-year-old Chloe and 8-year-old Madison, were playing. Faint giggles and the sound of an animated movie on the TV drifted through the half-open door. Neither of the girls had any idea that, in the next room, their family's foundation was on the verge of crumbling. Emily swallowed hard. Her heart hammered in her chest as she finally mustered the courage to break the silence. "Michael," she said softly, her voice trembling, "we need to talk." She looked up, her hazel eyes shimmering with tears not yet shed. Michael did not turn from the window immediately. He closed his eyes briefly, as if steadying himself, then opened them to gaze at the Hudson's dark waters. "All right," he replied quietly, his tone calm but guarded. He turned to face her, arms folded. "I'm listening." Emily's throat felt dry. She stood up on unsteady legs and took a few hesitant steps toward him. She had rehearsed this in her mind countless times over the past week, but now every practiced word evaporated. She began, then faltered. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I have to tell you something. Something I did. Something terrible." A flicker of concern crossed Michael's face. For a second, Emily saw the warm, gentle husband who always listened patiently to her worries. But tonight, there was also worry creasing his brow, perhaps even dread. Michael gestured for her to continue. "Go on," he said, maintaining a steady voice, though his chest tightened with anxiety. Emily's lips quivered. She glanced toward the girls' room, mindful that they were within earshot, and then back at Michael. Let's sit," she managed, motioning toward the sofa. Michael remained where he was for a moment, then relented, moving away from the window. The soft lamplight revealed his face more clearly now. Olive skin drawn tense over cheekbones, jaw clenched ever so slightly. He sat in the armchair adjacent to the sofa, leaning forward with elbows on his knees, bracing himself. Emily perched on the edge of the sofa, hands clasped tightly in her lap. She took a deep breath. "Michael, I want you to know that I never meant to hurt you, or the girls." She paused, wiping a tear that escaped down her cheek. Michael's eyes narrowed just a fraction, but he said nothing, letting her speak. She continued, words tumbling out in a rush now that she'd begun. "When I went to that marketing conference 3 months ago, the one in Los Angeles, I wasn't completely honest with you." Michael's heart sank. He recalled the conference, a week-long work trip. Emily had returned distant, not quite herself. He'd chalked it up to exhaustion or stress from her demanding role at the advertising agency. Now, dread coiled in his stomach. He kept his voice calm. "What do you mean?" Emily's eyes brimmed with tears. I met someone there, a colleague from the agency. We had been working together on the campaign." Her voice broke as she forced out the admission. "And I slept with him, Michael." The confession hung in the air like a living thing. For a moment, all Michael heard was a rushing in his ears, the distant city noise fading to nothing. He felt as though the floor had opened beneath him. Yet outwardly, he remained eerily still. In the silence, Emily began to sob quietly. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, burying her face in her hands. "It was a mistake, the biggest mistake of my life." Michael finally inhaled, realizing he'd been holding his breath. His face was pale, but his eyes flashed with a storm of emotions: hurt, disbelief, anger struggling to remain contained. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came at first. Chloe's laughter rang out from the other room again, startling them both. Michael's eyes darted to the doorway where the girls played unseen, and he quickly stood. He walked over and, as gently as he could, pushed the door closed until it was just a crack open. The girls didn't notice, too absorbed in their movie. Michael turned back to Emily, voice low and strained. "Who?" he asked simply, the single word laced with pain. Emily looked up, mascara beginning to smudge beneath her eyes. "It doesn't matter who," she pleaded. "He's nobody compared to you. It was just a stupid fling, I swear. We were out celebrating the contract win, had too much to drink." Michael held up a hand to stop her. The idea of Emily with another man cut him deeply, and details felt like salt on the wound. He paced a few steps across the plush carpet, one hand pressed against his forehead as if trying to ward off a migraine. "How long?" he managed to ask, staring at the bookshelf instead of her. Emily's voice was small. It only happened once. In Los Angeles. But when we got back to New York, we kept talking, texting, meeting for coffee a few times." She broke off, then added in a rush, "It ended weeks ago. I ended it. I knew it was wrong. I had to tell you because I can't live with this guilt, with the lying." Michael's jaw clenched harder. He finally turned to face her fully. "What about the girls, Emily? Our family?" he asked, his tone sharp yet hushed. "Did you think about us at all?" Tears rolled down Emily's cheeks. I don't know what I was thinking. I felt so lonely and under so much pressure with that campaign. You were always busy with work, and I was traveling so much." She shook her head vigorously. "It's not your fault. It's mine. I messed up, I know I did. I regret it every second." Michael lowered himself slowly onto the arm of the sofa, as if his legs might give out. He couldn't bring himself to sit next to her. The shock was wearing off, replaced by a cold, hollow feeling in his chest. "Why tell me now?" he asked quietly, voice shaking despite his effort to control it. "If it ended weeks ago, why not just let it die and move on?" There was a note of bitterness there. Perhaps he wished she had never told him, that he could have lived in ignorance. Emily hesitated. "Because I realized I can't lie to you. I can't look you in the eyes every day knowing I betrayed you. I had to come clean, even if—" Her breath hitched. "Even if it means you'll hate me." Michael closed his eyes. Hate. The word echoed in his mind. Did he hate her? At that moment, he wasn't sure what he felt. There was heartbreak, anger, a sense of profound loss. This woman he loved, the mother of his children, had broken a sacred trust. Part of him wanted to scream, to lash out, to demand how she could do this to them. But another part, perhaps in shock, remained eerily calm, as though watching this unfold from outside his body. Finally, he spoke, each word measured and quiet. "I don't hate you, Emily." He opened his eyes and looked at her. "But I'm hurt. And I'm angry." His voice caught on the last word, and he stood abruptly, distancing himself from her. Emily rose too, reaching out a hand. "Michael!" He took a step back out of her reach. He couldn't bear her touch right now. "Don't!" It wasn't a shout, but the force in that single word made Emily flinch as if struck. Michael turned away, running both hands through his hair. His mind raced, colliding thoughts of the past and present. He remembered the day he married her, how radiant she looked in her white dress, how certain he was that they would grow old together. He remembered each of his daughters being born, the night feedings, the bedtime stories shared as a loving family. All those memories now felt tarnished, overlaid by this revelation. Silence stretched between them, heavy and fraught. Emily's sobs had quieted, replaced by a look of despair as she watched her husband unravel before her. "Please say something," she whispered. "Yell at me if you want. I deserve it. Just don't keep silent." Michael let out a slow, shuddering breath. He realized he had been gripping the back of the armchair so hard his knuckles were white. Carefully, he released it, forcing himself to ease the tension in his muscles. "I can't do this right now," he said hoarsely. "The girls are just in the next room. I won't do this in front of them." Emily nodded quickly. "Of course. I agree." She stepped forward cautiously. "Maybe we can go into the bedroom and talk more? They won't hear us there." Michael shook his head. The thought of being in their bedroom, a space of intimacy, felt wrong in that moment. "No, not right now." He glanced at his watch reflexively. It was nearly 10 p.m. He felt an urgent need to get out, to breathe air that wasn't laden with pain and perfume and tears. "I need to clear my head," he said, his voice flat. "I'm going out for a bit." Emily's eyes widened in fear. She took a few steps toward him. "Michael, please don't leave. We should talk about this. She hesitated, voice breaking. "I'm afraid if you walk out that door, you might not come back." Michael looked at her, and for the first time since her confession, his eyes filled with tears. "I wish I knew what I'm going to do, Emily, but I can't be here right now." His tone was soft but resolute. Before she could protest further, a small face appeared in the doorway of the girls' room. It was Madison, clutching a stuffed unicorn, her blonde hair messy from playing. She looked at her parents with concern. "Mommy, why are you crying?" the 8-year-old asked in a timid voice. Both Michael and Emily froze, exchanging a quick glance. Emily hurriedly wiped her cheeks and tried to smile, though her voice still wavered. "It's okay, sweetie," she said gently. "Mommy's just a little sad, but I'm fine." Madison's big blue eyes flickered from her mother to her father. She could sense something was off. Michael managed to force a reassuring smile and walked over to scoop Madison up. "Hey, Munchkin, why aren't you in bed yet?" he asked softly, avoiding the question. Madison wrapped her arms around his neck. "Chloe and I were watching a movie," she said, still peering over at her mom with worry. "Why are you and Mommy upset? Did something happen?" Michael's heart ached as he held his little girl. He kissed her forehead. "Mom and I are just having a grown-up talk. Nothing for you to worry about, okay? It's late now. Time to sleep." Chloe, the 12-year-old, appeared behind her sister, hovering by the door with a wary expression. Chloe was old enough to pick up on the tension in the room. "Is everything all right, Dad?" she asked quietly. Michael carried Madison toward the girls' room. He paused by Chloe and freed one hand to gently squeeze her shoulder. "Everything will be all right," he said, hoping he sounded convincing. "How about you help your sister get to bed, and I'll come tuck you both in?" Chloe nodded slowly, taking Madison from his arms. "Come on, Maddie. Let's get your pajamas." The younger girl whined a little, but didn't protest as her sister led her back into their bedroom. Michael watched them disappear into their room. When he turned back, he saw Emily standing in the middle of the living room, arms hugging herself. She looked small and fragile and utterly devastated. His chest tightened at the sight. Despite everything, a part of him wanted to go to her and comfort her out of habit. But he couldn't. Not now. "I'll be back," he said quietly. "I just need some air. Some time to think." He walked to the front closet and pulled out his coat. Emily's voice trembled, barely above a whisper. "I'll wait up for you." Michael didn't reply to that. He slipped on his shoes and opened the apartment door. Before stepping out, he looked over his shoulder. Emily stood in the warm lamplight, tears silently streaming down her face, her arms wrapped protectively around herself. It was an image that would normally break his heart. But Michael felt numb as he stepped into the hallway and closed the door softly behind him. In the quiet corridor, he exhaled, feeling a sting of tears in his own eyes now that he was alone. He pressed the button for the elevator, trying to steady his breathing. His mind was reeling, but one thought cut through the chaos. She cheated on me. After all these years, she cheated. The words echoed in his head in disbelief and pain. The elevator doors slid open with a chime. Michael stepped inside the empty car and pressed the lobby button. As it began its descent, he leaned back against the wall, closing his eyes at last as a single tear rolled down his cheek. This night had changed everything. Nothing would ever be the same. He knew that with a cold certainty. Their marriage, their family, it was all hanging by a thread. And as much as it hurt, Michael also felt something else slowly stirring within him beneath the sorrow. A deep, simmering resolve. Emily had made her confession. Now he had to decide what to do with it. Chapter 2. Empty Gaze, Brooklyn Bridge. The night air was bitterly cold as Michael walked onto the pedestrian path of the Brooklyn Bridge. It was late enough that only a few people were around. A couple walking arm in arm in the distance, a lone cyclist whizzing by, leaving Michael largely alone with his thoughts. Above him, the bridge's iconic steel cables crisscrossed against the dark sky. The lights of Lower Manhattan sparkled behind him, while across the East River, Brooklyn's shore was a quieter glow. A stiff wind blew in from the water, cutting through his coat and making his eyes water as he took one deliberate step after another along the wooden planks. Michael barely noticed the cold seeping into his bones. His mind was elsewhere, replaying Emily's words on an endless loop. "I slept with him, Michael. I'm so sorry." Each time it echoed, he felt a fresh stab of pain. How had his life unraveled so suddenly in the span of an evening? One moment, he was a husband and father coming home to a normal family night, and the next he was, what exactly? A betrayed spouse? A man whose marriage was built on lies? He reached the first stone arch of the bridge and stopped, leaning on the railing. Below, the black waters of the East River churned softly, reflecting the city lights. Michael gripped the cold metal rail, his knuckles reddening in the chill. His breath clouded in front of him as he exhaled slowly. He tried to steady the whirlwind inside his head by focusing on the tangible details around him. The worn feel of the wooden planks under his feet, the distant hum of traffic on the roadway below, the faint smell of salt water mixed with city grit. The wind tugged at his short, dark hair, and he closed his eyes for a moment. In the darkness behind his eyelids, unbidden, came an old memory, one he hadn't allowed himself to think of in years. He was 17 again, back in Savannah, Georgia, on a warm spring night. In his mind's eye, he saw the high school football field under the floodlights, heard the distant cheer of a crowd after a Friday night game. He had left the celebrating crowd to look for his high school sweetheart Amy, only to find her behind the bleachers with another boy's arms around her. The shock and hurt that hit him in that moment had been like a punch to the gut. Michael could almost feel the thick, humid Savannah air of that night, so different from the icy breeze on the bridge now. He remembered how his heart had pounded painfully in his chest as he watched Amy kiss someone else, a teammate of his, no less. How the world seemed to tilt and crumble around him, the sound of their laughter together twisting the knife in his heart. He'd confronted her. He could still recall the tremor in his own voice when he shouted, "How could you?" Amy had burst into tears, apologies spilling out, but it was too late. Michael had walked away, his vision blurred with tears and teenage fury. That night, he had driven home in his old pickup truck, knuckles white on the steering wheel, swearing he would never feel so betrayed and humiliated again. For months after, he remembered, he couldn't bring himself to trust anyone. He broke up with Amy for good, ignoring her pleas for forgiveness. The sting of betrayal at such a young age left a deep scar. Even as he grew older, went to college, and moved to New York, a piece of that hurt lingered like a ghost, whispering to him to always be on guard, to never be too vulnerable. When he met Emily, those old fears had quieted down. She was warm, open, and devoted, or so he believed. With her, Michael felt safe enough to love deeply again, to build a life and a family without the constant fear of infidelity. He remembered telling her about Amy, years ago when they were still dating in their 20s. Emily had been sympathetic, squeezing his hand and promising him that she'd never hurt him like that. And Michael chose to believe her, letting his guard down completely for the first time since high school. Now, standing on the Brooklyn Bridge with the wind whipping at his face, Michael felt that old scar throb painfully to life. The very thing he'd feared, the betrayal, the humiliation, the collapse of trust, had happened again, this time with infinitely higher stakes. Emily wasn't a high school fling. She was his wife, the woman he had planned a future with, the mother of his children. The realization made his stomach churn. He opened his eyes and blinked back tears as he looked out toward the distant Statue of Liberty, its light just visible in the harbor. For so long, he'd been running from that past hurt, trying to believe it wouldn't happen to him again. And now here he was, living his worst nightmare for a second time. A heavy surge of emotion welled up inside him. Grief for the love he thought he had, anger at Emily's actions, fear of what this meant for his daughters and their family's future. The mix was overwhelming. Michael let out a shaky breath, watching it mist and disappear into the night. The old Michael, the young man who had walked away silently after being cheated on, had been a victim. But he was not that powerless teenager anymore. As he continued across the bridge, his footsteps fell into a steady rhythm. Each step seemed to ground him a little more. The initial shock was ebbing, replaced by a steely resolve. He realized that as devastating as Emily's confession was, he refused to let this destroy him. He had 2 daughters who needed him to be strong. He had his own self-respect, and he had an anger now that cut through the sorrow like a blade. His mind turned over the facts. Emily had cheated with a colleague from her advertising agency. She said it was a one-time mistake that spiraled into secret texts and coffee meetings. She claimed it was over. But was it truly over? And even if it was, could he ever believe anything she said now? Michael found himself instinctively reaching into his coat pocket for his phone. For a moment, he considered calling someone, maybe his best friend from college, or his older brother back in Georgia, someone to talk to process this with. But it was nearly midnight, and he wasn't ready to share this humiliation with anyone else yet. Not before he himself understood what he was going to do. Instead, he unlocked his phone and stared at the home screen, Emily's smiling face in the background of their family photo. The picture had been taken last summer at Coney Island. Emily laughing in a sun hat, the girls eating cotton candy, Michael's arm around all of them. They all looked so happy and carefree. Looking at it now felt like a cruel mockery. He clenched his jaw and locked the phone, shoving it back into his pocket. That life, the happy, trusting husband in that photo, felt like a stranger. She destroyed it, he thought bitterly. A gust of wind howled through the bridge's cables, and Michael pulled his coat tighter around himself. As he neared the Brooklyn side of the bridge, his stride slowed. He turned and gazed back at the Manhattan skyline. The Empire State Building's lights glowed against the darkness, and traffic on the distant FDR Drive glinted like a river of red and white. The city that never sleeps was buzzing with life, indifferent to his personal tragedy. Michael's eyes were drawn upward to the stars barely visible above the city glow. He remembered something his father used to tell him when he was a child. A bit of wisdom from a veteran police officer raising a son in Savannah. When you get hurt, truly hurt, you can either get bitter or get smart, his dad had said after Amy's betrayal left Michael heartbroken years ago. At the time, Michael hadn't fully understood. He'd thought he'd gotten smart by simply avoiding deep attachments for a while. But maybe there was more to it. Bitter or smart. The phrase echoed in his mind now. He realized with cold clarity that he could not simply forgive Emily and pretend everything was normal. That path felt like weakness, like setting himself up to be hurt again. And he refused to wallow forever as a victim, consumed only by bitterness. No, he needed to be smart. What did being smart mean in this situation? Michael's breath fogged as he sighed. It meant protecting himself and his children. It meant ensuring that Emily's betrayal would have consequences, that she couldn't just shatter their family and walk away unscathed. A hard glint formed in Michael's eyes as he stood there on the bridge. He wasn't yet sure what exactly he would do, but he knew he had to act, not just react. He thought about Chloe and Madison, asleep by now back at the apartment, or so he hoped. They deserved stability, honesty, and a father who wouldn't let them be hurt. If Emily could do something so reckless, endangering the happiness of their girls for the sake of a fling, how could he trust her with their well-being? The image of Emily crumpled in guilt on the living room sofa flashed in his mind. She had looked pitiful and remorseful. But so had Amy, once upon a time. He had fallen for tears and apologies back then, and ended up the fool. He wouldn't make that mistake again. By the time Michael reached the Brooklyn end of the bridge, his fingers were numb and ears burning from the cold. He paused at a scenic overlook just off the bridge path, where he could see the bridge's span lit up and the city beyond. He let the frigid air fill his lungs one more time, bracing himself for what lay ahead. There was no going back to the way things were. He understood that now. Trust, once broken, could not be magically restored with apologies. Love alone could not glue the pieces of his shattered marriage back together. Emily had made her choice, and now he would make his. Michael pulled out his phone again, this time with a clearer purpose. With stiff fingers, he scrolled through his contacts and found the number of an acquaintance of his, a private investigator he had met through a work function last year. At the time, Michael had thought it a little dark that people hired investigators to spy on spouses. But now the notion didn't seem dark at all. It felt necessary. His thumb hovered over the call button. It was nearly midnight. He would wait until morning. But he added the number to his favorites, just in case. As he turned to head back across the bridge toward Manhattan, Michael's expression hardened into one of resolve. The wind at his back now seemed to propel him forward. Each step was purposeful. He didn't feel like the lost, hurt man who had fled his apartment in agony an hour ago. Instead, a calm, cold determination was setting in. Looking ahead, he could see the outline of City Hall's cupola and the lights near the Manhattan side where the bridge ended. He had a long road to navigate, emotionally and practically, but he was not going to crumble. If anything, Emily's betrayal had awakened a side of him he rarely showed. Calculating, methodical, and unforgiving. Traits he usually reserved for high-stakes business negotiations or solving tough problems at work, he would now harness for something far more personal. Michael's gaze was fixed straight ahead as he walked. In his mind, plans and possibilities began to form out of the haze of pain, confronting the man who slept with his wife, securing evidence of the affair, consulting a lawyer to understand his options, and above all, safeguarding his daughter's future. One thing was certain, he would not let Emily's actions ruin the lives of those girls. If that meant being the bad guy or the hard-nosed one for a while, so be it. As he continued down the bridge, boots echoing against the planks, a final thought solidified in Michael's mind. The man who stepped off this bridge would not be the same trusting husband who had stepped on it. That man was gone. What remained was a father, a protector, and a man determined to seek justice for the wrong done to him and his family. There was no turning back now. Chapter 3. Shadows of the Past. Chicago. 2 weeks later, Emily and Michael found themselves in Chicago, standing in the wide-open living area of their modern loft. The space was chic and minimalist, exposed brick walls, high concrete ceilings, and tall windows that overlooked the twinkling lights of downtown Chicago far below. It was a loft they had purchased years ago when Michael's job had briefly brought them to Chicago. Now it mostly served as a crash pad for Emily's frequent work trips to the city. The irony of meeting here of all places to discuss the most painful moment of their marriage wasn't lost on either of them. Rain pattered lightly against the expansive windows, the late evening sky outside a deep indigo. Emily stood near the kitchen island, absent-mindedly tracing a finger along the cool marble countertop. Michael leaned against an exposed brick pillar a few feet away, arms crossed tightly over his chest. He had agreed to this conversation at her insistence. She had begged him to hear her out, to let her explain beyond the initial confession. Perhaps a neutral ground away from their New York home, and the girls would make it easier. But now, as the distant wail of a Chicago siren faded, an uneasy silence stretched between them. Michael's face was impassive, his gaze fixed on Emily, waiting for her to speak first. Emily took a shaky breath. She was dressed casually in jeans and a navy sweater, but she felt overdressed under Michael's hard stare. "Thank you for coming here to talk," she began softly. Michael gave a slight shrug. "I'm mainly here because you said you had more to tell me, so say it, Emily." He hadn't called her M, the nickname he'd always used since that night in Manhattan. The distance in his voice made her chest ache. Emily nodded, running her hands nervously through her hair. "All right." She looked around the loft as if hoping the right words might be hiding in one of the familiar corners. Her eyes landed on a framed poster on the wall, an old advertisement from a successful campaign she had led years ago. It showed a glamorous model holding a perfume bottle, and at the bottom in stylish font, "Elegance, by Maison d'Or, 2018. Emily remembered how proud she'd been of that campaign, how Michael had surprised her with that framed poster as a congratulatory gift. It felt like a lifetime ago. "I owe you the whole truth," she said, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "Not just that I cheated, but why? How I let myself do something so awful to you and the girls." Michael's expression remained stony. "I'm listening." She licked her lips, which had gone dry. "You know about the Lincoln Park campaign I've been working on for the last 6 months? The marketing campaign for that new boutique hotel. It was a really big deal for me, for the agency, and I was the lead creative director on it." Her voice wavered a bit as she spoke. Michael continued to watch her, giving away nothing. Emily pushed on. "That campaign was supposed to be my crowning achievement of the year. I poured everything into it. Late nights, constant travel between New York and Chicago. I wanted it to be perfect. And it was, professionally. The client loved it. It was a success." She paused, her gaze dropping to the concrete floor. "But when it was over, I don't know how to explain it. I felt empty." Michael's brow furrowed, but he remained silent. "I thought accomplishing something big would make me happy," Emily continued, voice thin. "But instead, when it ended, I just felt useless, like I had nothing left. The office moved on to the next big project, and I felt like I was just another cog in the machine." She sighed shakily. "And during all those hectic months, you and we were barely seeing each other. You were busy with work. I was always on a plane or in meetings. We'd talk on the phone, but it was always quick check-ins or about the kids' schedules. We were drifting, even if we didn't want to admit it." Michael uncrossed his arms, his jaw tightening. "So, what are you saying? That our marriage wasn't making you happy either?" There was a slight edge to his voice, defensive and hurt. Emily quickly shook her head. "No, I mean, yes, I was unhappy, but it wasn't because of you or the girls. It was me. Something in me felt off, like I was having some kind of early midlife crisis. I felt old, Michael." Her eyes welled up, but she blinked the tears back. "I'd wake up and not recognize who I was. Just a mom in sweatpants on the weekends and an overworked ad executive on weekdays. I didn't know where the fun, creative Emily went. It's stupid, but I started pitying myself." Michael ran a hand through his hair, clearly struggling to process. "Everyone feels lost sometimes, Em," he began, then caught himself and corrected. "Emily, but you don't fix that by blowing up your family." His words were cutting, but she knew she deserved that. Emily wrapped her arms around herself as if cold. I know that now, more than ever. But at the time, I was looking for something to make me feel alive again. And then there was Brian. At the mention of the name, Michael's eyes narrowed. It was the first time she had said the lover's name aloud to him. Brian, the colleague from her firm who had crossed the line from friend to something else. He was working with me on the Lincoln Park project, Emily said carefully. We were in the trenches together on it. Late-night brainstorms, traveling to client presentations. He was funny and he looked up to me, admired my work. She let out a bitter little laugh. I think I was craving that validation, to feel interesting and attractive again, not just a tired working mom. Michael's lips pressed into a thin line. So you decided to sleep with the guy because he gave you a few compliments? Emily winced. It wasn't like I planned it. It just happened. Don't say it just happened, Michael interrupted, a flash of anger breaking through his calm facade. Affairs don't fall out of the sky, Emily. You made a choice. Several choices, in fact. To flirt back, to meet him, to let it get that far. Emily flushed, tears spilling now. You're right. I made those choices. I'm not excusing myself. I'm just trying to make you understand my messed up headspace. I was feeling depressed, and I latched onto the attention he gave me like an idiot. Michael shook his head, looking away from her, out the window at the hazy glow of the city. I can understand feeling lonely or down, Em. He stopped himself again from using her nickname, and it hung awkwardly. But I can't understand throwing away everything we built for a fling. Emily stepped closer, daring to inch around the kitchen island toward him. I wasn't trying to throw anything away. At first, I told myself it was harmless flirtation. Then, that night in Los Angeles, after we landed the contract, we were at the hotel bar. We'd been drinking, and one thing led to another. Her voice broke with shame. The next morning, I hated myself. I told him it was a mistake, that it could never happen again. He agreed. We promised it was a one-time stupid lapse. Michael's stare returned to her, cold and skeptical. But it didn't stop at one time. Emily's hands trembled as she wiped her eyes. No, it didn't. Back in New York, after a couple weeks, he started texting, casual stuff at first, checking in about work. I should have cut it off completely, but I felt guilty and didn't want to be rude. And part of me liked that someone was still thinking about me. She hated how pathetic that sounded. Michael's nostrils flared as he took a deep breath. So you met up with him? She nodded miserably. A few times. For coffee, just to talk. I told myself we were just friends, that we could keep it professional. But I was lying to myself. There was an attraction there that I kept playing with, like fire. And then one night a couple months ago, I met him for a drink in the West Village after work. I told you I was out with some girlfriends from the office. Instead, it was him. We kissed. I realized if I didn't stop, I would end up right back in bed with him again. So I finally ended it that night. I told him we were done and that I loved my husband, and I was never going to speak to him outside of work again. Michael let out a short, humorless laugh. And yet you waited until 2 weeks ago to tell me. Why, because you felt so guilty you couldn't stand it? Emily bit her lip. Yes, and because I was afraid. Every day I wanted to tell you, but I was terrified. I thought maybe I could bury it and we could go on. But I couldn't live with myself. So I made myself tell you. You deserve to know the truth. Michael was silent for a moment, processing her words. His face was tense, but less outright angry now, as if seeing her break down was diffusing some of his rage and replacing it with a cold resolve. Finally, he spoke, voice low. What about him? Brian. Is he still in Chicago? Are you still working together? Emily shook her head quickly. No, the Lincoln Park project is basically done. I haven't had to see him. He He actually tried to contact me a couple times after I cut things off, but I ignored it. He even sent a message just yesterday asking if I was going to be in Chicago this week. I didn't respond. Michael's eyes flickered. Yesterday? Show me. He stepped forward, suddenly holding out his hand. Emily blinked in confusion. What? Your phone, Emily, Michael said firmly. If he messaged you yesterday, I want to see it. Emily instinctively placed a hand over the phone that was lying face down on the counter. It was a reflex, part shame, part fear of what else might be on it. Michael, I told you I didn't answer him. Michael's voice hardened. After everything, you should have nothing to hide, right? Let me see your phone. I want to be sure you're not still talking to him. Heart pounding, Emily nodded and slid the phone across the counter to him. All right. She knew there were no current conversations with Brian beyond that unanswered text, but she also knew her phone likely still contained incriminating evidence. Old messages, perhaps a photo or two. She had been in such turmoil. She hadn't done a thorough scrub of her digital traces. A spike of panic shot through her as she wondered what Michael might find. Michael unlocked her iPhone. She had given him her passcode back on the flight to Los Angeles in case of emergencies, and apparently he remembered it. He opened her messages. Emily saw his eyes scanning, likely finding Brian's text. Without a word, he navigated to her photos. Michael, please, she whispered, feeling exposed and anxious. What are you looking for? He didn't respond. His face was set as he scrolled through her photo gallery. Suddenly he stopped, his jaw tightening. This, he said quietly, turning the phone around to show her the screen. What is this, Emily? Emily felt the blood drain from her face. On the screen was a photo she recognized instantly, a selfie Brian had taken of the two of them at a bar back in New York. It was from that night in the West Village, just before things went too far. In the picture, Emily was smiling timidly at the camera, Brian's arm draped casually around her shoulders as he grinned. They looked like a happy, carefree couple. Emily's voice caught. She hadn't even realized Brian's selfie was still on her phone. She thought she had deleted all the pictures, but obviously she'd missed one. I forgot that was there. I'm sorry. Michael's eyes flashed with hurt and anger as he stepped toward her, holding the phone up. You forgot? That's convenient. Look at how cozy you two are, Emily. Just friends having a drink, huh? Emily's eyes welled with tears anew as she glanced at the photo, damning evidence of her betrayal. We were saying goodbye in that picture, she said weakly. That was the night I ended it. Michael shook his head, disgusted. He snatched the phone back as if the image itself burned. Unbelievable, he muttered. You keep a souvenir of the night you cheated on me and expect me to buy that it was some tragic mistake you regretted? Before she could answer, something unexpected happened. The lights in the loft flickered once, twice, then went out completely, plunging them into darkness. The gentle hum of the refrigerator died, and the city lights outside became the only faint illumination, casting long shadows into the loft. Emily gasped in surprise. What? Michael's silhouette stiffened. Power outage, he said. Hold on. The electronic glow of Michael's phone screen lit up as he tapped it, using it as a flashlight. Stay here, he instructed quietly. Emily's heart drummed in her chest. The timing of the outage felt eerie, as if the universe were punishing her further. She watched Michael's back as he moved toward the loft's entrance hallway. Be careful, she whispered. Just then, a different sound cut through the silence, a metallic creak and a thud from outside one of the windows, near the fire escape. Emily's head snapped toward the noise. Did you hear that? She asked, her voice hushed. Michael had heard it too. He turned, phone light now pointed toward the large windows along the wall. Through the glass, he could see only the reflection of the loft's interior faintly, and beyond that, darkness. Rain droplets on the window caught a bit of city glow, obscuring the view outside. There it was again. A distinct clank of a footstep on the metal fire escape stairs just beyond the window, followed by a scuffling sound. Emily's head pounded. Her first panicked thought was that maybe the building was being robbed or someone was trying to break in. Or could it be Brian? The idea chilled her. Had he somehow known she'd be here tonight and come looking for her? Michael reached the window and peered out, pressing his face near the glass to look down the length of the fire escape. The rain made it hard to see. At first he saw nothing, just the empty metal stairs glistening wet under the dim streetlights. But then, a flash of movement on the landing one floor down caught his eye, a shadowy figure darting quickly out of view, descending the steps to the street level. "Hey!" Michael shouted, pounding once on the window. "Who's there?" No answer. The footsteps on the fire escape quickened and then disappeared into the noise of the city street below. Emily, unable to bear the uncertainty, inched closer. "Did you see someone?" she whispered, voice trembling. Michael nodded grimly, still staring outside, trying to catch another glimpse. "Someone's there. Or was. They're gone now. Probably ran off." He hurried to the front door, yanking it open and stepping into the hallway. Emily followed a few steps behind, not wanting to be alone in the dark. The emergency lights in the corridor provided a faint yellow glow. Michael made his way to the stairwell that led to the building's side exit near the fire escape. Emily hovered at the apartment doorway, heart in her throat. Moments later, Michael returned, shaking his head. "They're gone. Whoever it was must have taken off." Emily exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Could it have been a burglar? Michael frowned. Maybe. Could be someone tried the fire escape looking for an open window to break in and got spooked when the power went out or when I yelled. Emily wrapped her arms around herself, still shivering from adrenaline. The loft was pitch black behind them, save occasional flashes of light from Michael's phone. "This is so creepy," she murmured. "First the power, then someone on the fire escape. It's like something out of a thriller." Michael didn't respond immediately. He was still looking down the hallway, thoughts turning behind his eyes. Eventually, he guided Emily back inside the loft and closed the door securely. "The whole block might be out," he said, glancing toward the windows. Other buildings across the way looked dark too. "Likely a transformer blew or something. Let me find a flashlight." He navigated to a closet and pulled out a large mag light, clicking it on to bathe the room in a stronger beam of light. Emily watched him, her nerves still frayed. She kept casting anxious glances at the window and the drawn blinds. Michael noticed. "I locked the window," he assured her. "And whoever that was is probably long gone." Emily nodded, but stepped closer to him, drawn by the need for some sense of safety. She was frightened, and without thinking, she reached out and touched Michael's arm lightly. "Thank you," she said softly, "for checking. I was scared." Michael looked down at her hand on his forearm. His face was partially in shadow under the flashlight's glow, making it hard to read his expression. He gave a curt nod and gently pulled his arm away, not unkindly but firmly. "It's fine." The rebuff stung, but Emily understood. He wasn't ready to let her seek comfort from him, not after what she'd done. They stood there in awkward silence, the tension from their emotional confrontation now mixed with the unsettling intrusion from outside. The air felt thick with unease. In the dim light, the loft's broad windows showed the rain falling heavier now, streaking the glass. Michael finally broke the silence. "I'll call building maintenance to report the outage," he said, his tone businesslike. "And maybe let the front desk know someone was on the fire escape. They might need to alert the police to patrol around." He pulled out his phone to find the superintendent's number. Emily remained quiet, arms hugged around herself. She felt utterly drained, emotionally raw from laying out her soul, and now jittery from the fright. As Michael stepped aside to make his calls, Emily slumped onto the sofa. She stared into the darkness of the loft, her eyes adjusting enough to make out vague shapes of their furniture. In the heavy silence, her mind raced. Who had been outside their window? Could it have been Brian after all, worried and checking on her? Or was that too far-fetched? She hadn't told Brian she would be here, and she doubted he'd cross such a boundary. Still, the coincidence nagged at her. Meanwhile, Michael had finished his conversation with the building's maintenance line, reporting the outage. He walked back over, slipping his phone into his pocket. They're aware of the outage. Power should be back in a couple hours, they said. Fuse problem due to the storm. Emily nodded absently. She looked up at him, her eyes searching his. In the semi-darkness, Michael's face was illuminated by the flashlight resting on the counter, highlighting the lines of stress and fatigue. I'm sorry, she whispered again, fresh tears in her eyes. The apology held so much, not just for the affair, but for dragging him into this bizarre, miserable night. Michael looked at her for a long moment. His anger seemed to have cooled into something else, a distant, cold resolve. I know you are, he said quietly. But that doesn't fix anything, Emily. He moved to the armchair opposite the sofa and sank down, clearly exhausted. Emily wanted to reach across the gulf between them, to somehow undo the damage, but she felt paralyzed. The only sounds were the drumming rain and the occasional drip of water from the eaves onto the metal fire escape outside, where moments ago a mysterious intruder had fled. It felt as if the shadows of their past mistakes were literally lurking around them. After a long silence, Michael spoke again, voice measured. You've explained your side, I've heard you out, but I still can't just get over what you did. He took a breath, steadying himself. I need you to understand that this might be something I never get past. Emily's throat tightened. Please, Michael, I'll do anything to make it up to you. I'll go to counseling, I'll quit my job if I have to. We can move if you want a fresh start. He held up a hand. Let's stop there. It's late. We're both worn out. His tone was firm, signaling the end of the conversation for now. We should try to get some rest. Emily wanted to protest. How could she possibly sleep at a time like this? But he was right that nothing more could be solved tonight. All right, she conceded quietly. She stood, not sure if Michael would even want to sleep in the same space. There were 2 bedrooms in the loft, the master and a guest room. I can take the guest room, she offered softly, assuming he'd want to be alone. Michael nodded, confirming her suspicion. That's fine. Emily lingered, staring at him through the dim light. She yearned to hug him, to cry into his chest and beg his forgiveness once more, but she knew it would only irritate him now. So she turned and padded toward the hallway. Just as she reached the doorway, Michael's voice came, softer than before. We'll figure out what to tell the girls. About everything. But not yet. Emily paused and looked back, her eyes adjusting to see him clearly. He looked terribly sad as he gazed off toward the rain-lashed windows. Okay, she whispered. Good night, Michael. He didn't respond with words, only gave a faint nod and leaned his head back against the chair, closing his eyes. Emily swallowed the lump in her throat and quietly left him sitting there in the dark. As she felt her way to the guest bedroom, she couldn't shake the image of that shadow slipping away on the fire escape. Nor could she shake the feeling that even though she had finally confessed everything, the darkest shadows of their past, of her betrayal, were still looming over them, refusing to be dispelled by mere apologies. In the darkness of that Chicago loft, Emily realized that saving her marriage might prove even more impossible than navigating it here by the faintest of lights. And Michael, alone with his thoughts, realized that the shadows of what Emily had done would not be easily banished. They would follow them, lurking, perhaps until he did something about it. Chapter 4. Game Without Rules, Basil Park. Early the next morning, a gray sky hung low over Chicago. The storm from the previous night had dwindled to a light drizzle. Emily pulled up the hood of her coat as she hurried across the slick concrete of the Basil Park parking garage, where she'd left her car the day before. The Basil Park structure was mostly empty at this hour, the echoes of her footsteps the only sound aside from a distant city traffic. Her mind was still reeling from everything that had happened the night before. The emotional confrontation with Michael, the eerie blackout and Prowler, the sleepless hours until dawn. Michael had barely spoken to her this morning. He'd left the loft early, saying he needed a walk to clear his head, and told her she should pack up so they could head home to New York later that day. Now, Emily made her way to her vehicle on the third level of the parking garage. She clicked the key fob absent-mindedly to unlock it as she approached, her thoughts elsewhere, mainly on Michael's grim demeanor as he left, and what awaited them back home. Would he even be coming back to their apartment, or would he stay elsewhere? How would they pretend everything was normal to the girls? As she neared her car, a bright splash of color that looked out of place in the dim garage caught her eye. Emily's pace slowed. Her heart lurched when she realized what it was. A wide streak of red paint slashed across the driver's side door. Thick and dripping, it looked like it had been hastily sprayed or brushed on, the crimson paint stark against the silver of the car's exterior. "What the—" Emily breathed, rushing forward. She stared at the vandalized door in disbelief, her pulse skyrocketing. The paint was still tacky. When she gingerly touched the edge of the smear, her fingertips came away red. It couldn't have been long since it was done. Frantically, she circled around to inspect the rest of the car. Her stomach dropped at the sight that awaited her. All four tires were completely flat, ugly gashes visible in the rubber where they had been slashed. The car sat lopsided on its rims. On the hood, someone had splattered more red paint, the droplets resembling blood spatter to her horrified imagination. Emily's hands flew to cover her mouth as she fought back a scream. Adrenaline surged through her. Who would do this? Her first thought was that it might be connected to the person on the fire escape last night. Was it a random act of vandalism or something more targeted? Her mind raced through possibilities. Chicago certainly had its share of vandals, but this felt personal. The paint. It almost looked like someone had angrily taken a bucket of red paint and thrown it at the car. A symbolic act, maybe, red for anger, or like marking the car with a scarlet letter. Trembling, Emily pulled out her phone to call the police, or at least building security. But before she could dial, a voice spoke calmly from behind her. "Quite a sight, isn't it?" Emily whirled around with a gasp. Michael was standing a few yards away, hands in the pockets of his jeans. She hadn't heard his approach. He wore a worn denim jacket and a navy baseball cap with an MLB logo pulled low, droplets of drizzle clinging to the brim. He looked strangely casual, except for the intensity in his eyes as he regarded the vandalized car. "Michael!" Emily exhaled, her nerves shot. "Oh my God, did you see what someone did to my car?" He walked closer, his sneakers making soft thuds on the concrete. His expression was one of feigned surprise. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I saw." Emily's eyes searched his face. He seemed remarkably composed given the situation. Her own heart was pounding wildly. "Who could have done this? I don't understand," she stammered. "It had to have happened this morning. Maybe it's that person we heard last night, or some random vandal." Michael stopped beside her and surveyed the damage with a critical eye. Up close, Emily could see the red paint had dripped in long streaks, some of it puddling on the ground. It looked vicious. Michael let out a low whistle. "They really did a number, didn't they?" Something in his tone made Emily look at him sharply. It was almost as if there was a note of satisfaction buried beneath his words. He met her gaze evenly. "You think this isn't random, do you?" Emily asked softly, dread creeping into her voice. Michael shrugged one shoulder. "Hard to say. Could be random." He nodded towards a security camera mounted on a pillar nearby. Maybe the cameras caught whoever it was. Emily followed his gesture. The camera was aimed roughly at her car's area. Some hope sparked in her. We should alert the garage security. See if they have footage. Michael gave a slight nod, but he didn't move. He kept his eyes on her, studying her reaction. You're shaking, he observed. Of course I'm shaking, Michael, Emily burst out, unable to contain her anxiety. This is terrifying. Somebody slashed my tires and defaced my car with this. She gestured at the red paint angrily. I mean, who does that? What if... Her voice choked off. She was about to say, what if someone did this because of me? Because of what I did? But she couldn't bring herself to voice it. Michael stepped around her car slowly, inspecting it from all sides. Emily noticed he was oddly calm, as if appraising a piece of art rather than the wreckage of her vehicle. He crouched down by a front tire and ran a finger lightly along the deep cut in the rubber. A pretty sharp blade, he murmured. Clean slice. She stared at him. Michael, do you know something about this? He stood up, meeting her eyes with a cool, unreadable expression. Why would I know anything? I just got here. Emily's mind flashed to his sudden appearance, his unusual attire. Michael hardly ever wore that old denim jacket or a baseball cap unless he wanted to go unnoticed. He usually dressed much sharper. And why had he come to the garage? He'd said he was going for a walk. Basil Park was a few blocks from the loft. Maybe he came to find her. Or... The thought surfaced unwillingly. Did Michael do this? Immediately, she rejected it. Slashing tires and vandalizing property was crazy behavior, criminal even. He was hurt, yes. Furious with her, yes. But surely he wouldn't stoop to this. Would he? She realized she was staring at him, her mouth slightly open. Michael raised an eyebrow. Emily, you think I had something to do with this? He asked, as if reading her thoughts. I don't know what to think, she admitted, voice small. You showing up right now? And you're so calm about it. His lips curved in a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. Believe it or not, I didn't slash your tires. His denial was steady, but something in his eyes remained inscrutable. Emily felt a small rush of relief, but it was quickly tempered by the suspicion that he might not be telling the full truth. Really? Because I can't imagine who else. Unless Brian... She trailed off, considering for the first time that her jilted lover could have done this. Perhaps he had tried to approach her at the loft last night, the footsteps, and then, enraged or desperate, vandalized her car as payback or a plea. It seemed far-fetched. Brian was not violent in her experience, but everything felt upside down now. Michael walked slowly back towards her. He took off the baseball cap, shaking some raindrops from it. You know, he said conversationally, I wonder how it feels to be on the receiving end of something like this. Emily frowned, confused. What do you mean? Michael looked directly at her, and in the dim light of the garage, his eyes looked darker, harder. Imagine coming out and finding something you care about completely wrecked. Feeling violated, blindsided. Pretty awful, right? She swallowed, an uneasy feeling growing in her stomach. He wasn't talking about the car anymore, she realized. Her voice was a whisper. Yes, it's awful. Michael stepped closer, the toes of his shoes nearly touching the puddle of red paint near her feet. Now you understand what it feels like, he said quietly. What others feel when something important to them is destroyed. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Others. He meant himself, she knew. And possibly their children too. The family trust she had shattered. He was drawing a parallel between her ruined car and the ruined marriage, making sure she grasped the pain from the other side. She felt tears sting her eyes. Michael, I know I hurt you. You know I'd do anything to take it back. He studied her tearful face for a moment, then simply nodded towards the car. Call security. Get them to pull the tapes. Maybe you'll get your answer. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even comfort. It was a sidestep. And Emily realized he truly had no intention of consoling her over this. He might even believe she deserved it, whether he did it or not. She pulled out her phone with trembling fingers and dialed the garage management office. As she spoke to the security officer on duty explaining the situation, Michael strolled a few steps away, hands back in his jacket pockets. He seemed lost in thought as he gazed out at the rain beyond the garage entrance. Within minutes, a burly security guard arrived, apologetic and concerned. He assured Emily they would review footage immediately and call the police if needed. Emily thanked him, though her voice sounded distant in her own ears. Everything felt surreal. When the guard left to check the cameras, Emily realized Michael had moved to lean against a concrete pillar, checking something on his phone. Red paint flecks speckled the ground near him. She noticed, with a start, a tiny smear of red on the white rubber sole of his sneaker, just a thin line. Her mind jumped. Could that have gotten there if he'd stepped in paint? But it could also be from walking through the vicinity of her car just now. She tried to push the thought away. Michael glanced up from his phone. Are they looking at the footage? He asked evenly. Yes, Emily replied. She hesitated, then addressed the elephant in the room. Michael, if you did have anything to do with this, please, tell me. His eyes flashed angrily, and he opened his mouth to retort. But just then, the faint sound of her ringtone cut through the damp air. Her phone was still in her hand, and the screen lit up with Chloe, mobile. It was their 12-year-old daughter calling from New York. Emily's stomach flipped. Chloe never called this early unless something was wrong. She immediately answered, turning away from Michael and walking a few paces for some privacy. Chloe? Honey, what's the matter? Mom? Came Chloe's voice, high and distressed. Emily could hear Madison crying in the background. Mom, where are you? Are you still in Chicago? We woke up and Dad wasn't here, and you weren't home, and no one told us you both were leaving. Aunt Carol said you had to go on a work trip, but... Her daughter's voice cracked with panic. What's happening? Are you and Dad okay? Emily's heart broke at the fear in Chloe's tone. Sweetie, I'm so sorry, she said gently, clutching the phone. I'm so sorry we didn't explain better. Daddy and I had to take care of something important in Chicago, but we're okay. I promise, we're both okay. Then why didn't you say anything? Chloe cried. We were so scared when we woke up and it was just Aunt Carol. We thought something happened to you. Aunt Carol, Michael's sister, must have come to stay overnight with the girls. Michael likely arranged that, but apparently hadn't explained much to the kids. Emily shot a look at him. He was standing a short distance away, watching her with a pained expression as he likely overheard bits of the conversation. Chloe, put Aunt Carol on, please, Emily said softly. There was some muffled movement. Then Carol came on the line, her voice brisk but kind. They were worried out of their minds. I tried calling you earlier, but it went to voicemail. Emily realized she had missed calls. Her phone had been on silent since the security call. Guilt washed over her. I'm so sorry, Carol. This trip came up suddenly. Carol's tone indicated she knew something serious was going on, even if she didn't have details. The girls overheard Mike on the phone late last night sounding upset. Then this morning he asked me to come over early. He left before dawn for the airport. They know something isn't right. After the confrontation, Michael must have immediately planned their Chicago meeting, likely telling Carol only that they needed to go away overnight and to please watch the kids. Now the kids were terrified of what it meant. Emily closed her eyes. How could she possibly smooth this over? She felt a tear roll down her cheek. We'll be on a flight back this afternoon, she said. Can you stay with them until we get home? I'll talk to them as soon as we're back. Just please reassure them that we love them and that we're coming home. Carol sighed. Of course. They're just scared. Try to prepare what you're going to say. They're asking me if you and Mike are divorcing or something. Carol's voice held a question, fishing for clarity. Emily's throat tightened. I I don't know, Carol. I hope not. We'll talk when we get home. There was a pause, then Carol replied gently, All right. Travel safe, Em. Travel safe. See you soon. She handed the phone back, and Chloe's sniffly voice came on again to say goodbye. Emily spent a minute soothing both girls, promising them she'd be back by dinner and that she and Dad loved them very much. It was agonizing to hear Madison sobbing, asking, Mommy, you're not leaving us, right? After finally ending the call, Emily wiped her face, took a deep breath, and turned back to Michael. He had stepped away further during the call, giving her space, but he had clearly heard enough to know the girls were distraught. They're scared out of their wits, Michael, she said, accusation creeping into her tone despite her best efforts. They woke up and found both of us gone. Michael's face tightened. I left them with Carol to make sure they were safe. I didn't know what to tell them yet, Emily. I wasn't going to lie, but I wasn't ready to tell them anything either. Emily threw up her hands. So you just vanished on them? Of course they're freaked out. They think we're divorcing or something horrible happened. Michael rubbed the bridge of his nose, a flash of guilt crossing his features. I screwed up. I should have said something. I'm not exactly thinking clearly right now. His admission of fault was small, but it cooled Emily's anger a degree. She realized he was in uncharted territory too, trying to protect the kids, but also reeling himself. This whole situation was a nightmare for both of them. The security guard returned then, looking apologetic and shaking his head. Ma'am, I checked the footage from about an hour ago. Unfortunately, the camera by your car has been on the Fritz rainwater got into the casing. It recorded nothing useful, just static, during the time frame this happened. I'm really sorry. Of course, Emily thought bitterly. How perfectly unfortunate. She nodded to the guard. Thank you for trying. He offered to call the Chicago PD to file a report and arrange a tow for the car. She agreed, though part of her wondered what good it would do. This felt like one more unsolvable problem on top of a heap of others. As the guard headed off to make calls, Emily turned back to Michael. I guess we'll have to catch a cab to the airport. The car's not going anywhere. Michael nodded. I'll call for one. He pulled out his phone, stepping aside to arrange a taxi or rideshare. Emily stood there, arms wrapped around herself, as the drizzle blew in a fine mist onto the open side of the garage. She stared at her ruined car. It hit her that in the past 24 hours, piece by piece, her life was being systematically wrecked. Her marriage, her security, her family's happiness, and now even something as mundane as her car. It was as if everything she relied on was crumbling or under attack. She thought of Michael's chilling words. Now you understand what others feel. Was this all just part of some twisted lesson for her? If Michael truly had no hand in it, fate itself was surely twisting the knife. But if he did, how far would he go to punish her? Michael returned, slipping his phone away. Car will be here in 5, he said. He waited a beat, then added in a tone that was almost gentle. The girls will be all right. We'll talk to them together when we get back. Emily nodded silently. She appreciated the use of together, a glimmer of unity when everything else felt fractured. Okay, she said softly. They stood side by side in the damp garage, saying nothing more. In the distance, the honk of a taxi echoed, likely their ride arriving at the street level. Michael picked up her suitcase, he'd already brought it down earlier, and gestured for her to follow to the exit. As they walked away from the vandalized car, Emily cast one last look over her shoulder. The red paint gleamed in the faint morning light like an open wound. She shivered and pulled her hood tighter, turning her back on the sight. Whatever game had begun, this game without rules where revenge could strike in unexpected ways. Emily felt utterly unprepared. But as she glanced at Michael's set jaw while he led the way to the taxi, she realized she had no choice but to play. She had to be ready for whatever came next. Chapter 5. Broken Mirrors, Social Media. Back in New York, a cold determination drove Michael forward. In the days following their tense return from Chicago, he had moved with a single-minded purpose. By outward appearances, he was handling practical matters, going back to work, helping the girls with homework, maintaining a semblance of normalcy at home. But late at night, after the girls were in bed and Emily retreated to the guest room to sleep alone, Michael's true focus emerged. He sat in his home office one midnight, the only light coming from the glow of his laptop screen. On it was an Instagram profile for a woman named Sophia Morales. The profile photo showed a stylish young brunette in front of a mural, an image Michael had sourced from a real Chicago street artist's public page. The bio read, "Visual artist, Southside chi-raised, traveler, dreamer, lover of street art and good conversation." It was exactly the sort of profile that might catch the eye of a man like Brian. Michael leaned back in his chair, reviewing the profile content one more time. Over the past week, he had carefully crafted Sophia's online persona. He posted a handful of photos, all innocuous and borrowed from various corners of the internet. Sophia at a gallery opening, Sophia sketching by Lake Michigan, Sophia laughing at a coffee shop. He'd even peppered in some art lingo in her captions to make it convincing. The account had a few dozen followers, mostly bots and a couple of real artists Michael followed to make her seem legit. But it followed many more, including a selection of advertising professionals in Chicago. One of those professionals was Brian. Michael had found Brian's Instagram easily. It was public and full of carefully curated images of Brian's life. Him clinking glasses with co-workers at a rooftop bar, him posing with a group at some marketing awards gala, and scenic shots of Chicago. Among Brian's followers, Michael noted, were many colleagues from the ad world and even the official account of the boutique hotel in Lincoln Park that had been the focus of that big campaign. Clearly, Brian was proud of his involvement with that project. Using Sophia's account, Michael had liked a couple of Brian's posts and left a brief comment on one of his street art photos. "Love this mural, the colors." It didn't take long for Brian to bite. A day later, Sophia received a direct message. "Brian, hey, thanks for the love on my pic. Always cool to meet a fellow art lover." Michael remembered the surge of grim satisfaction he'd felt seeing that DM arrive. People like Brian were so predictable. Now, over the course of several days, Michael, as Sophia, had struck up a rapport with Brian. They chatted about Chicago's art scene, the best coffee houses in Pilsen, and even the Lincoln Park Hotel project, which Sophia claimed she had heard about through a friend in the industry. With each exchange, Michael steered the conversation subtly, alternating between showing interest in Brian's work and playfully flirting. He learned that Brian was basking in the success of the hotel campaign, the promotional rollout was going well, and the client was happy. Brian made only a passing mention of Emily. Apparently, he had the sense not to brag about an affair to a new acquaintance. Instead, he presented himself as an up-and-coming ad exec who worked hard and played hard. And crucially, Michael gleaned that Brian had a weakness for female attention. Sophia's occasional compliments, "You sound like you have such a creative soul," or "Wish I could see your work in action sometime," were always met with eager enthusiasm. Tonight, Michael was ready to set the trap fully. He cracked his knuckles, then began typing a new message as Sophia. "Sophia, so I have a confession. I actually know more about that Lincoln Park project you did than I let on." He hit send and watched the screen. The little notification dot showed that Brian was online. Within a minute, the reply came. "Brian? Oh, really? Do tell. Haha." Michael allowed a small smirk. Hook, line, sinker. He typed swiftly. "Sophia, I was at the soft opening party for the hotel last month. Saw your presentation, very impressive stuff. But I heard some gossip too?" A pause. Then, "Brian, gossip? Now you have to share? What are people saying? Hopefully good things." Michael imagined Brian's slight panic behind the casual tone. Time to dangle the bait. Sophia, oh, nothing crazy, just, that one of the lead creatives. You? Might be looking to jump ship to a bigger agency soon. My friend said she overheard you mentioning you're not totally happy with your firm. Any truth? That ought to prod him. If there was one thing Michael had learned in business, it's that flattery and the allure of greener pastures could loosen a person's tongue. He waited, tapping a finger on the desk. Outside the window, Manhattan was quiet, a few car honks in the distance. The reply came. Brian, off the record? Okay, between us, yeah, I've been considering options. The firm is fine, but I feel like I could use a bigger platform for my ideas. TBH, I carried that hotel project, and my boss is taking a lot of the credit. I've had offers from 2 other agencies already. Michael felt a spark of triumph. That was exactly the kind of talk that could burn Brian if revealed, bragging about disloyalty and job hunting while on a major client's campaign. He nudged a bit further. Sophia, wow, you must be in demand. Can't say I blame you, though. Loyalty is overrated in corporate life, right? Go where you're appreciated. If you ever want to collaborate on something fresh, I have contacts in the art and advertising world too. He made sure to add the wink to keep Brian's ego stroked and maintain the flirtatious vibe. Brian, absolutely. Maybe we can meet up to talk about that sometime? I'd love to pick your brain on blending art with marketing more. Plus, would be great to meet in person after all this chat. There it was. The invitation. Michael's eyes hardened. He knew Brian would jump at a meeting. The man had been trying to angle for one for a few days now, dropping hints about coffee or drinks. Michael had held him off with excuses as Sophia, wanting to build trust first. Sophia, I'd like that. How about this weekend? There's a gallery opening in River North on Saturday. Lots of artsy folks. Could be fun. We can grab a drink after? Brian, sounds perfect. Count me in. Michael confirmed the time and place, then leaned back, cracking his neck. It was almost too easy. But the meetup itself wasn't the endgame. Michael had no intention of actually letting Brian meet anyone. The plan was to use the anticipation of a meeting to prompt more candid talk from Brian on chat, and maybe even some compromising photos. He went to work planting the seeds. As the days progressed toward Saturday, Sophia messaged Brian frequently. She sent a selfie. Michael had curated one especially for this, a mirror photo of the same brunette, looking club-ready. He'd found it on a fashion blog and filtered it to look like an Instagram story screenshot. In the caption, she teased, "Outfit for Saturday, you approve?" Predictably, Brian responded with effusive praise. "Looking gorgeous! Now I'm nervous, haha!" By the day of the supposed gallery opening, Brian was clearly hooked and maybe even a little smitten with the fictional Sophia. That afternoon, Michael, as Sophia, sent him one more key message while presumably getting ready. Running late, wrapping up a painting session. Might meet you at the bar instead of the gallery. BTW, got any pics to share? Turnabout is fair play? Show me your handsome face before I see it IRL. It took some back and forth, but eventually Brian obliged with a selfie of himself smiling, taken in what looked like his apartment. Innocent enough, but Michael saved it. He wanted tangible proof Brian had engaged with this woman beyond professional chat. With everything in hand, Michael executed the final phase. That evening, he ghosted Brian. Sophia never showed up at the gallery or the bar they had loosely planned to rendezvous at. When Brian messaged, worried he couldn't find her, Sophia did not respond. Instead, Michael was busy using a different account, an anonymous throwaway, to disseminate what he'd gathered. On an industry forum frequented by ad professionals in Chicago, a new post appeared from a user named TruthSeeker88. It detailed how a certain ad exec at Denton and Myers, Brian's firm, had been privately trashing his own company and wooing a local artist with promises of greener pastures. Attached were screenshots. One of Brian's messages, where he boasted about carrying the hotel campaign and entertaining other offers, and another showing him complimenting the artist's looks and eagerly setting up a rendezvous, implicitly mixing business with pleasure. Michael wrote the post carefully to not mention Emily at all. This was purely about undermining Brian's professional standing, not exposing the affair. The affair was his personal vendetta. Professionally, ruining Brian didn't require involving Emily's name and risking collateral damage to her career. He also direct messaged the juicy details to a couple of advertising gossip social media accounts, the kind that thrived on rumors of agency poaching and executive misbehavior. Within hours, the tidbit was circulating in the local industry circles. By Monday morning, the fallout hit. Michael was at his desk at work in Manhattan when he got the text he'd been waiting for from a former colleague in Chicago. "Did you hear about that guy Brian W.? My friend at Denton and Myers says he's off the Lincoln Park project. Client demanded he be removed. Something about inappropriate communications." Wow. Michael allowed himself a tight-lipped smile at his screen. He felt a cold sense of justice, one more blow delivered. That evening at home, he overheard Emily on a tense phone call in the den. "I'm sorry, Brian, I don't know anything about it," she was saying, her voice strained. "Yes, I heard you lost the account. I'm so sorry." "What do you mean someone set you up? Who would—" "No, of course it wasn't me." Michael stood quietly in the hallway out of her sight, listening. Emily paused, absorbing the rant coming through the phone. "Brian, listen," she said. "I think you should just lay low and let this blow over. Talking about lawsuits will only draw more attention. I can't talk about this right now. I'm sorry." She hung up, sounding flustered. A moment later, Emily stepped out of the den, nearly bumping into Michael. She startled, her nerves clearly on edge. "How long have you been standing there?" she asked, eyes red as if she'd been crying or close to it. "Just got home," Michael lied casually, holding up his car keys as proof he'd come in. "Everything okay?" Emily looked at him, and he could see the suspicion forming in her eyes, even as she tried to keep her face neutral. That was Brian. Something happened at work. He lost the Lincoln Park project and maybe his job. He says someone impersonated a woman to trap him, or leaked messages. It all sounds so— She searched for the word. So elaborate. Michael shrugged, managing a perplexed frown. "Really? Wow. Well, you know how cutthroat agencies can be. Maybe a rival firm wanted him out. Or he could be covering his own screw-up by claiming a setup." Emily studied him for a long moment. The silence stretched. Michael met her gaze without blinking. Inside, his heart beat a tad faster. He wondered if she could sense his involvement, or if guilt was written on his face. But he'd had years of practice maintaining a poker face in negotiations. He employed the same mask now. Finally, Emily sighed and looked away. "Maybe," she murmured. She sounded unconvinced, but also too weary to press the matter. "It's just awful." He sounded desperate. Michael pursed his lips as if sympathetic. In truth, hearing that Brian was panicking gave him a grim satisfaction. "Well," he said calmly, "actions have consequences. If he was mixing unprofessional behavior with work, it was bound to catch up to him." The double meaning wasn't lost on either of them. Emily flinched slightly, hearing in his words a reflection of her own situation. Without another word, she brushed past him, heading toward the kitchen, perhaps to busy herself or just escape the conversation. Michael stood in the hallway for a moment, exhaling slowly. 2 targets down. Emily's lover was disgraced and out of the picture professionally, and Emily herself was living each day in uncertainty and regret. But he wasn't done. Not yet. As he turned to hang up his coat, his phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from the attorney he had quietly contacted to begin divorce proceedings. He'd been deliberately keeping Emily in the dark about it, not wanting to tip his hand until the papers were ready to serve. The email confirmed what he'd been waiting for. The draft petition was ready, and the wheels were in motion. Michael's eyes hardened as he locked his phone. Next step, he thought. It was time to take this to the courts, where he would make sure the devastation Emily felt would become official. The broken mirrors of social media had done their work on Brian. Now, legal justice would have its turn. Chapter 6. Justice of the Heart, New York Court. A month later, Emily sat on a wooden bench in the hallway of the New York County Courthouse, hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her heart thudded against her ribcage as she stared down at the polished marble floor, trying to steady her breathing. This was the day she'd been dreading. The first court hearing in the divorce that Michael had initiated. When the official papers had arrived weeks ago, delivered by a stern-faced process server to their apartment, Emily had felt physically ill. The divorce petition listed Michael as the plaintiff and her as the defendant, and it detailed in cold legal language the breakdown of their marriage due to her marital misconduct. It had been like reading a report about someone else's life, someone who had ruined everything. What shocked her further was seeing the name of her own attorney printed on the paperwork. Richard Feldman, ESQ, Skadden Arps. She hadn't retained Richard. In fact, she had never even heard of him. Michael had later calmly explained that Richard was an acquaintance of his from law school who worked at Skadden, and as a favor, he had asked Richard to represent Emily to make sure things were fair. Emily had been too numb and overwhelmed at the time to question it deeply. Part of her was even relieved. She wouldn't have to scramble to find a lawyer on her own. Michael hiring a lawyer for her sounded bizarre in retrospect, but he'd framed it as wanting a quick, civilized process for the sake of the kids. Now, waiting for their case to be called, Emily wasn't so sure about any of it. Richard, a trim man in an expensive navy suit, sat beside her, rifling casually through documents. He had spoken to her only briefly so far, assuring her that we'll get through this as painlessly as possible. But she felt no particular reassurance. She had barely had a real conversation with him about her side of the story. Down the hall, the doors to the courtroom opened, and Michael stepped out with his legal team. He was flanked by two attorneys from the same elite law firm, one of them a senior partner, a silver-haired woman with a commanding presence, and the other a younger associate carrying files. Michael himself was dressed in a sharp charcoal suit, looking every bit the confident corporate professional. His eyes met Emily's for a moment across the corridor. She couldn't read him. His expression was composed, almost blank, save for the slight downward pull at the corner of his mouth that only she would recognize as tension. "All right, they're ready for us," Richard murmured, standing up and buttoning his suit jacket. Emily rose on shaky legs. She smoothed the front of her black skirt, hands trembling. As they entered the courtroom, Emily's eyes darted around. It was a large, formal chamber with a high ceiling and rows of wooden benches. The judge's bench loomed at the front, and to the side sat a court reporter and a clerk. The judge, a stern-looking woman in her 60s with wire-framed glasses, was already flipping through some documents, presumably their case file. Emily and Richard took their seats at the respondent's table, while Michael and his two lawyers took the petitioner's table a few feet away. Emily dared a glance at Michael as they settled in. He adjusted his chair and finally looked directly at her. For an instant, she thought she saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Regret, sadness, she wasn't sure. But it was gone in a blink, replaced by a steady resolve as he turned to whisper something to his lead attorney. "All rise," the court clerk announced. "Family Court of New York County is now in session. The Honorable Judge Helen Carver presiding." Everyone stood. Judge Carver gave a curt nod and gestured for them to sit. "Be seated. We're here today in the matter of W versus W, docket 45, 382. Counsel, please state your appearances for the record." Michael's attorney stepped forward. "Good morning, Your Honor. Elaine Thompson of Skadden Arps, counsel for the petitioner, Michael W. With me is my colleague, James Lee." She motioned to the junior associate. Judge Carver's gaze moved to Richard. He cleared his throat. "Good morning, Your Honor. Richard Feldman, also of Skadden Arps, appearing for the respondent, Emily W." If the judge found it unusual that attorneys from the same firm were on both sides, she didn't show it outwardly. But Emily noticed a faint narrowing of the judge's eyes. Indeed, it was highly unconventional. Technically, they'd set up a conflict wall within the firm, but it still felt like everyone in the room except her was on the same team. A ripple of doubt passed through Emily. Why had she ever agreed to this arrangement? It felt increasingly like she'd been outmaneuvered. Judge Carver shuffled some papers. All right. I understand this is a preliminary hearing on temporary relief and custody arrangements pending the final divorce proceedings. Am I correct, Miss Thompson? Yes, Your Honor, Michael's lawyer confirmed. We have filed motions concerning temporary custody of the minor children and exclusive occupancy of the marital residence. We believe these matters are urgent given the circumstances. The judge peered over her glasses. And the circumstances would be what exactly? Elaine Thompson cast a glance at Michael, then addressed the judge. Your Honor, the circumstances are that the respondent, Mrs. W., has demonstrated behavior that calls into question her fitness as a custodial parent at this time. Specifically, her extramarital affair and the resultant emotional harm inflicted on the family. Emily felt a stab of humiliation as murmurs rippled through the nearly empty courtroom. There were only a few other cases waiting, but whoever heard would now know her shame. She cast her eyes down, cheeks burning. Judge Carver raised an eyebrow. This is a no-fault divorce state, Miss Thompson. Generally, infidelity alone isn't grounds for custody changes unless there's a direct impact on the children's well-being. Are you alleging such an impact? Michael's attorney nodded. Yes, Your Honor, we are. We have evidence to show that Mrs. W.'s actions and subsequent behavior have adversely affected the children and the stability of the home environment. The judge looked to Emily's side. Mr. Feldman, are you disputing that? What is your client's position? Emily turned to Richard, praying he would defend her vigorously. But Richard gave a diplomatic half-smile and stood. Your Honor, Mrs. W. acknowledges she made a grave mistake, but she is a loving mother and does not pose any risk to her children. We believe any temporary measures should be balanced and focused on maintaining stability for the kids without unduly limiting their contact with their mother. It was a mild response, and Emily's heart sank a little. He didn't refute anything, just softened it. Very well. Miss Thompson, proceed with your evidence, Judge Carver said. What followed was one of the most excruciating hours of Emily's life. Michael's team was frighteningly thorough. They submitted into evidence a series of exhibits labeled A through H. One by one, these were presented. Exhibit A. Copies of text messages between Emily and Brian, extracted from her own phone. There they were, blown up on a screen for the judge flirtatious exchanges, including one where she had lied to Michael about working late when in fact she was meeting Brian. Emily felt sick seeing her private sins laid bare. Exhibit B, phone records showing dozens of late-night calls from Emily's phone to Brian's number over a span of months, often after midnight, when Michael and the children presumably were asleep. The implication, as Elaine pointed out, was that Emily was focusing on her lover even during times she should have been present for her family. Exhibit C. An email Emily had sent to a close friend confiding about the affair, something she had foolishly put in writing, in which she vented that she felt trapped in her marriage and overburdened by responsibilities. It was taken out of context and made her sound resentful of her own children. Emily felt tears prick her eyes as that was read. Exhibit D. A report from a child psychologist. Michael had apparently taken Chloe to see a therapist shortly after the separation began. That therapist wrote an opinion stating that Chloe exhibited anxiety and fear about her mother's absence and the conflict at home, and recommended a consistent, calm environment with minimal disruptions for the children. While it didn't directly blame Emily, Elaine used it to argue that the upheaval Emily caused necessitated giving Michael sole control for now. Exhibit E, a character reference letter from Michael's mother, the girl's grandmother, subtly suggesting that Emily had been distant and inattentive with the children in the months leading up to the affair's revelation, which, unbeknownst to Grandma, coincided with Emily's intense work project. The letter praised Michael's devotion and implied the children would benefit from being primarily with him. Exhibit F. A series of candid photos. Emily realized with a shock that Michael must have hired a private investigator at some point. They showed her and Brian entering the West Village bar, another of them seated close together inside, and one of them sharing a brief kiss on a street corner. Though grainy night shots, they were unmistakable. Emily felt her stomach churn with shame. She could not bear to look at Michael then, but she imagined he was staring straight ahead, coldly resolved. Throughout this onslaught, Emily's attorney Richard made only light objections, mostly on relevance. Judge Carver overruled them, deeming the evidence potentially relevant to the best interests of the children, which is the standard in custody decisions. When it was Emily's turn to speak, or rather, her attorneys Richard offered a brief argument that while Mrs. W. admitted to marital misconduct, there was no evidence she was an unfit mother, or that the children were in any danger with her. He emphasized she had no history of substance abuse, no mental illness, no issues that would normally trigger limiting custody. He suggested that the matter be referred to family mediation or evaluation rather than severe temporary orders. Emily noticed he didn't challenge the authenticity or propriety of the evidence much, nor did he call any witnesses on her behalf. They had, after all, prepared none. He didn't mention how devastated Emily was to lose her family or her willingness to do whatever it took to make it right, things she wished someone would say. The judge, for her part, remained quite neutral through the hearing, occasionally asking questions. She inquired directly to Michael's side whether there was any claim of Emily endangering the children physically. The answer was no, not physically. She also asked if there had been any incidents of neglect. Elaine carefully suggested that Emily's preoccupation with her affair might have constituted a form of emotional neglect, pointing out an instance where Emily missed Chloe's school recital while on a rendezvous, another detail Michael must have fed his lawyers. Finally, after both sides had spoken, Judge Carver folded her hands and delivered her ruling. She prefaced it with a stern look directly at Emily. Mrs. W., it is clear to this court that your actions have had a deleterious effect on your family. You not only violated the trust of your spouse, but in doing so, you created an environment of instability for your children. They are young and need consistency and a sense of security. Emily's eyes brimmed with tears. She nodded faintly, accepting the reprimand. She had no defense, really. The judge continued. Temporary situations are about preserving the status quo and protecting the children's well-being until final orders can be made. Given the evidence presented, particularly the psychologist's report and the pattern of behavior shown, I am going to grant the petitioner, Mr. W., temporary sole physical custody of the children. Legal custody will remain joint for now, meaning you both have input on major decisions, but day-to-day care and residence will be with the father. A sob escaped Emily's throat before she could stop it. Richard put a restraining hand on her arm. She bit her lip hard to keep from breaking down. Judge Carver's voice remained steady, devoid of malice but firm. Mrs. W., you will have visitation rights. However, given the circumstances, I find it appropriate to order that your visitation for the time being be supervised and limited to daytime weekends, say 8 hours each Saturday and Sunday, until this court is assured that it would not be disruptive or harmful to the children's emotional state to expand those visits. You may, of course, see them in a therapeutic setting as recommended, such as joint counseling if that's arranged. Each word felt like a blow. Supervised visits? Emily couldn't hold back the tears now. They rolled down her cheeks silently. She was officially considered so potentially damaging that she couldn't even be alone with her own daughters. Michael sat stoically through the pronouncement, but Emily saw him lower his gaze when the judge detailed the visitation restrictions. Did she detect a hint of sadness in his face? It was hard to tell through her own blur of tears. The judge wasn't finished. I will also grant the petitioner exclusive occupancy of the marital home for now, meaning Mrs. W. will need to find alternate housing during the proceedings. This is to reduce conflict and stress for the children. Arrangements can be made for her to collect her personal belongings at a mutually agreed time. Emily's breath hitched. On top of everything, she was effectively being kicked out of her own home, at least temporarily. She had been staying there in a tense cohabitation with Michael up to now, each sleeping in separate rooms and communicating minimally except about practical things for the girls. Now she'd have to pack a bag and leave, possibly stay with a friend or get a short-term rental. The thought of not being there to kiss her girls goodnight in their own bedrooms sank into her like lead. Judge Carver finalized the hearing with a few standard remarks about behaving civilly and considering mediation. Then she looked at Emily directly once more. Mrs. W, I strongly encourage you to use this time to reflect and to show the court that you can prioritize your children's needs above your own. If you do so, it will be considered when we revisit custody for the final decree. This court's primary concern is the welfare of Chloe and Madison. Emily managed to croak out, "Yes, Your Honor," between sniffles. And just like that, the temporary order was entered. The gavel wasn't dramatically struck like on TV, but Judge Carver's word was final. The hearing concluded, and she moved on to the next case on her docket without fanfare. Michael and his lawyers immediately stood and began quietly gathering their documents. Emily remained seated for a moment, dazed and shattered, until Richard gently touched her shoulder and indicated they should exit. As they walked out of the courtroom, Emily felt hollow. Richard was speaking about next steps, something about perhaps arranging a psychological evaluation that could help her case, and advising her to comply with all the court's requirements. She barely heard him. She glanced ahead and saw Michael at the end of the hall, speaking in low tones to his attorneys. The older lawyer, Elaine, gave him a small approving smile and a pat on the arm before she departed, heels clicking on the tile. The younger associate followed. For a moment, Michael stood alone by the window at the end of the corridor, sunlight from a skylight falling on him. He looked in her direction. Emily slowed, unsure if he wanted to speak to her or if she even could find words if he did. Richard discreetly stepped aside, sensing perhaps that his clients might need a word privately. Emily walked forward, wiping her tear-streaked face and attempting to compose herself. Michael met her halfway. They stood facing each other in that grand hallway, the sounds of distant echoing footsteps around them. For a few seconds, neither spoke. Michael's eyes were unreadable, fixed on her face. She broke the silence first, voice cracking. "Well, you got what you wanted." It came out more bitterly than she intended, tinged with raw pain. Michael's jaw tightened. He glanced away briefly. When he looked back, his eyes had a sheen of moisture in them too, though he stood rigid. "What I wanted," he said quietly, "was for you to never do what you did. But we're past that." Emily's lip trembled. "So taking my children away from me is justice? Is that what this is?" Her tone wasn't angry so much as pleading, desperate for some understanding. He looked at her for a long moment. "I'm not trying to take them away forever. I'm trying to protect them, Em." The old nickname slipped out, perhaps unconsciously. "They're all I care about now." Emily's chest ached. "I care about them too. They're my whole world, Michael. Please, you have to know that." Her voice was thick with emotion. "I know I failed you. And yes, I failed them too by extension. But I love them. This will destroy me." Michael's face contorted subtly, as if her words pained him. He took a breath. "You should have thought of the consequences before you—" He stopped himself, shaking his head. The anger that flared was quickly buried under a frosty calm. "I have no choice but to do what I think is right for them. Maybe one day you'll see that." Tears of despair slid down Emily's face again. She realized nothing she could say would soften him right now. He was entrenched in his role as the wronged father. And perhaps in his mind he truly believed this was righteous. A small part of her, buried under the hurt, even acknowledged that he might be right, that the girls needed stability after what she'd done. but the punishment felt so harsh. "I'm sorry," she whispered, voice breaking. It was all she had left. Michael closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them, they glistened. "I know you are," he said softly. For a fleeting second, his mask fell. He looked as heartbroken and lost as she was. "But sorry doesn't fix this." With that, he straightened and stepped back. "Richard will work out the details of your visitation schedule and picking up your things. I'll stay somewhere else that day to avoid a scene." His tone was formal now. Emily nodded numbly. She wanted to reach out, to touch his arm, to beg for any small mercy. But she knew it was futile and undignified. Instead, she mustered what little strength remained and asked, How are we going to tell the girls?" Michael frowned, as if the question burdened him. "Gently, together if possible, but we'll figure that out soon. For now, I'll tell them you're going on a little trip for work, and that they'll see you on the weekend." The thought of her babies worrying over why Mommy wasn't around at night broke Emily's composure again. She stifled a sob with her hand. Michael looked like he might reach out to her, but he stopped himself, hands clenching at his sides instead. "Don't make it harder on them than it has to be, Emily. Please." She dropped her hand, revealing red eyes and a trembling mouth. "I won't," she whispered. He gave a curt nod. Then, with obvious difficulty, Michael turned and walked away down the hall without another word. Emily stood there watching his back recede, tears blurring her vision. In that moment, she realized the man she once knew as her loving husband truly was gone. In his place was someone determined, perhaps even cruel by necessity, to ensure she paid for what she'd done, in the name of the children, in the name of what he saw as justice. This was justice of the heart, she thought bitterly. The kind of justice that didn't necessarily align with mercy or forgiveness, but with the raw, cold pain of a betrayed heart seeking balance. And in the quiet corridor of the courthouse, Emily felt the full weight of that justice descend on her, leaving her emptier than she had ever been. Chapter 7. The Price of Victory. Charity Ball. 6 months later, the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel glittered with opulence. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over round tables draped in ivory linens. The room was filled with New York's well-to-do, philanthropists, executives, socialites in designer gowns and tuxedos. Laughter and the clink of champagne glasses rose above the soft strains of a live string quartet in the corner. It was a charity gala to support a city program for single mothers, an annual fundraising ball that drew some of Manhattan's elite. Near the entrance, Emily stood to the side, clad not in an elegant evening gown, but in a simple black dress with a volunteer badge clipped to her waist. In her hands was a stack of event programs, which she dutifully offered to each arriving guest with a polite smile. None of the attendees likely guessed that just a year ago, she might have been among them as a guest, rather than part of the volunteer staff. "Welcome," Emily greeted an older couple who stepped up. The woman accepted a program and gave Emily a distracted nod, too busy talking to her companion about someone they recognized across the room. As they moved on, Emily released a soft sigh. Her feet were already aching in her modest heels, and the night was just getting started. But she wasn't complaining. In fact, she was grateful to be here, doing something worthwhile. It was part of the new life she was building, piece by piece, out of the wreckage of the old. After the brutal court hearing half a year ago, everything had changed. Emily had moved out of the apartment on the Upper West Side. For the first month, she crashed with a college friend in Queens, commuting into Manhattan for work and attending her weekend daytime visits with Chloe and Madison at Michael's mother's house. Michael had arranged that the girls would be brought there for their supervised time with Emily, a setting deemed comfortable and neutral. Those initial visits were awkward and painful. The girls were confused and hurt, and a social worker hovered nearby as required, making the once natural interactions stilted. But gradually, Emily worked to rebuild trust. She never missed a scheduled visit. She poured love and attention on the girls in those precious hours, helping with homework, playing games, taking them to the park, with the supervisor trailing at a discreet distance. Bit by bit, they began to smile around her again, to relax. Madison would climb into her lap for story time. Chloe started texting her in the evenings with little school anecdotes or to share a funny meme. Parallel to this, Emily threw herself into self-improvement. As a condition, informal but very real, of any possible future easing of restrictions, Michael had made it clear that he expected her to address the issues that led to the betrayal. In the divorce settlement negotiations, he had leverage to demand certain terms, one of which was that he would pay spousal support, alimony, for a period of time, but only on the condition that Emily attend regular therapy and perform community service. "You need to find a better version of yourself, for the kids' sake," he had said to her in one of their mediated discussions, his tone firm but not unkind. This is a way to do that. So Emily had agreed. Twice a week, she went to a group therapy session at a community counseling center near Union Square. The group was for women grappling with family crises. Some had lost custody, some had histories of addiction or infidelity, others were simply overwhelmed single moms trying to hold it together. Initially, Emily had felt out of place and defensive, reluctant to share. But listening to others speak openly about their regrets and struggles chipped away at her isolation. In time, she opened up too, admitting her own failures, voicing her guilt, processing the cascade of events. The support and sometimes tough love she received in that circle of chairs did wonders to clear the fog in her mind. She began to understand the deeper reasons behind her affair, her feelings of inadequacy, the communication breakdown in her marriage, the internal void she tried to fill in all the wrong ways. Concurrently, she joined a volunteer program, the one hosting tonight's gala, which provided mentorship and resources to single mothers in need. Twice a week, she helped at a community kitchen and led a workshop on resume writing for young moms trying to re-enter the workforce. Ironically, in serving others who had far less stability than she did, Emily found a sense of purpose that had been missing. Each time she comforted a struggling mother or played with a toddler in the daycare, she felt a little piece of her heart healing. And simultaneously, a pang of recognition that she was effectively a single mother too, albeit one with limited mothering to do. Michael's financial support, processed through the NYC child support system and monitored to ensure she kept her end of the deal, allowed her to afford a small one-bedroom sublet in Chelsea. It wasn't the spacious home she had shared with her family, but it was hers, a place to regroup and slowly move forward. Now, as she volunteered at the gala, she thought about the strange trajectory of her life. A year ago, she would have been at an event like this hanging on Michael's arm, making small talk with other couples about summer plans or the latest Broadway show. Tonight, she had exchanged her high society role for that of a humble worker bee. And yet, Emily found she didn't mind. In fact, she felt more at peace than she had in a long time. She was here because she believed in the cause, not because it was a glittering social occasion. That realization struck her as one of the many prices of her so-called freedom. She had lost her status, her comfort, her marriage, everything that once defined her life. But in stripping away those things, she had found a more genuine sense of self. "Excuse me," came a woman's voice, jolting Emily from her thoughts. "We're out of programs at this table. Do you have some extras?" Emily looked up to see one of the event coordinators gesturing at a side table where attendees picked up brochures and pledge cards. "Oh, yes, of course," Emily replied. She grabbed a handful of programs from her stack and followed the coordinator, helping replenish the table. As she arranged the materials, a familiar voice spoke from behind her. "Emily?" She turned and found herself face to face with a woman she recognized, a friend of hers, or rather of hers and Michael's, from their old life. It was Vanessa Chang, a fellow mom from Chloe's school and a marketing VP at a tech firm. Vanessa was dressed in a shimmering blue gown, her hair elegantly swept up. She looked at Emily with polite surprise. "Vanessa, hi," Emily said softly. She wondered how much Vanessa knew. Likely a lot. These circles buzzed with gossip when she and Michael split, though the public story was kept vague. I didn't realize you were involved with New Start, Vanessa said, referring to the charity. Emily mustered a small smile. I've been volunteering with them for a few months now. It's a wonderful program. Vanessa returned the smile, a bit hesitantly. That's great. Really great. There was an awkward pause. Vanessa's eyes flicked to the volunteer badge on Emily's dress, and then back up. How are you doing? I'm doing well, thanks, Emily said, and to her own surprise, she meant it sincerely. Keeping busy. How are you? How's Lily? Lily was Vanessa's daughter, one of Chloe's classmates. Oh, she's good. Growing fast. She misses having Chloe in class. I know your girls are at a different school now. She caught herself, realizing the topic might be sensitive. After the separation, Michael had indeed transferred the kids to a different school, partly to shorten their commute from his new apartment and perhaps also to avoid gossip. Emily missed the daily school interactions and seeing familiar faces like Vanessa, but it was one more thing she had let go. Before the conversation could become more uncomfortable, another guest approached Vanessa, drawing her away with a question. Vanessa gave Emily a parting nod. It was nice to see you, she said, and seemed to mean it. You too, Emily replied, and watched her disappear into the crowd of donors. Emily turned back to her volunteer duties, though her gaze wandered across the ballroom now. The dinner portion of the evening was beginning. People were finding their seats as waiters circulated with wine bottles. At the dais, a city official began the introductory speech, thanking everyone for their generosity toward New Start's mission of empowering single mothers. Emily lingered near a pillar along the wall, out of the way, yet able to observe. Her eyes found Michael almost without effort. He was seated at a table near the front. She recognized the back of his head, his posture. He wore a classic black tuxedo, and as he turned slightly, she could see his face in profile, attentively listening to the speaker. He looked handsome, confident, and composed. He had spotted her earlier in the evening when he first arrived. She'd felt his gaze from across the foyer as she handed out programs. He'd given her a courteous nod, but had been swept into conversation with a board member before they could exchange any words. Perhaps that was for the best. This wasn't the place for personal discussions. Still, Emily watched him now, reflecting on how much had changed in half a year. Michael had, true to his word, done everything in his power to create a stable environment for their daughters. He had rearranged his work schedule to be more available to them, hired a kindly housekeeper to help with after-school care, and enrolled the girls in a family counseling program which he diligently attended with them. By all accounts, he was excelling as a single dad. Chloe and Madison were doing better in school, and their initial anger and sadness had gradually mellowed into a new normal. They loved both their parents, but they accepted that life was different now. For Michael, this was the victory he had sought. A well-adjusted life for the girls, free from the turmoil that Emily had introduced. Sitting here tonight among peers and colleagues, he looked every bit the successful, devoted father who had it all under control. And Emily? She had paid the price for that victory. The price of her freedom, freedom from a marriage she hadn't even truly wanted to escape until she made the worst mistake of her life, turned out to be tremendous. It cost her her status, her daily motherhood, her best friend and partner, and her reputation. She had been humbled in every sense of the word. But as the saying went, the truth shall set you free, even if it breaks you first. Emily felt that truth tonight. Yes, she had been broken by the consequences, but in the rebuilding, she had discovered a more genuine self. The speaker at the podium invited everyone to enjoy their meal and bid generously in the silent auction. Applause followed. As chatter resumed, Michael excused himself from his table and made his way toward the edges of the room. Emily realized with a flutter of nerves that he was walking in her direction. She straightened her posture and wiped her palms on her dress subtly. Michael approached, his expression gentle, if a bit uncertain. When he reached her, he offered a small smile. Good evening. he said softly. Hi, Emily replied, smiling back. Despite everything, seeing him still made her heart constrict with a mixture of remorse and lingering affection. You've been busy, he noted, nodding toward her badge. I saw you running around taking care of things. Emily nodded. It's a big night for the program. We want it to go perfectly. Michael's eyes took in the grand scene. It seems to be going very well. They're lucky to have you volunteering. The compliment warmed her. Coming from him, it meant more than from anyone else here. Thank you. It's been rewarding, actually, in ways I didn't expect. He met her gaze, and for a moment, they just looked at one another, a world of unsaid things between them. Michael was the first to break the silence. The girls told me you helped a mom and her kids find housing last month, through this charity. They were really proud of you. Emily felt tears threaten, but they were bittersweet, not devastating. I told them about that family during our last visit. I was proud too. Proud that I could do something good, I guess. Michael nodded slowly. Chloe and Maddie are doing well, he offered gently, as if to reassure her. Chloe aced her science project. Madison has been practicing that song you taught her on the piano. She wants to play it for you this weekend. Relief and gratitude flooded Emily. This kind of amicable sharing about the girls would have been impossible half a year ago when things were raw. I can't wait to hear her play, she said softly, and I'm so happy they're thriving. You've done an amazing job with them, Michael. He gave a modest shrug. I do what I can. It's not always easy. Chloe's hitting those preteen years. She has a bit of attitude these days. He chuckled softly, then his face grew more serious. Honestly, they miss you. Even if things are smoother now, you're still their mom. They talk about you a lot. A small ache lodged in Emily's chest. I miss them too, every day. Michael looked down, fiddling with the cuff of his tux jacket. I know you do. He cleared his throat. Listen, I wanted to tell you, I've been speaking with Dr. Klein, the family therapist. She thinks the girls are ready for more time with you, unsupervised. If we agree on a plan, we might not even need to go back to court to adjust the visitation. Emily's eyes widened. Really? This was what she'd been working toward for months, but to hear Michael actually propose, it felt like a gift. He smiled just a little. You've earned it. You've kept every promise, therapy, volunteering, being consistent for the kids. I can see how hard you're trying. He paused. And I'm grateful for that. It's made things better for the girls. Tears of relief welled in Emily's eyes, but she blinked them quickly so as not to make a scene. Thank you, she whispered. That means everything to me. Michael nodded. For the first time in a long while, the tension between them eased into something almost companionable. They stood side by side, watching the gala attendees mingling. A waiter passed with a tray of champagne, and Michael grabbed 2 glasses, handing one to Emily. She hesitated. Technically, I'm on duty, she joked lightly, but he pressed it toward her with a knowing look. She accepted it. They clinked softly. To new beginnings, he said, voice quiet. To our girls, she responded, adding what mattered most. They sipped. The bubbly liquid was celebratory and a little sad all at once. Emily glanced at Michael. In the golden light of the ballroom, he looked as dignified and strong as ever. But there was a gentleness in his face now as he regarded her that she hadn't seen in a long time, not since before the storm of betrayal. It wasn't romantic love or reconciliation. It was something like respect, perhaps acknowledgement of her efforts. She felt a surge of emotion. Michael, I want you to know that I understand now truly why you did everything you did. The divorce, the custody fight, all of it. You were right. The girls needed stability, and I was too lost in my own mess to give it to them then. He looked like he was about to protest or downplay his actions, but she continued, "No, let me say this. I don't have any anger toward you for how hard you fought me. I was angry before. I felt like you were punishing me beyond what I could bear. But now I see it from your perspective. You were protecting our family in the only way you knew how. And it worked. They're okay. We're all okay." Her voice trembled slightly at the admission. Michael exhaled, his shoulders easing. "I never wanted to punish you, Emily. I was angry, yes, and hurt. But more than anything, I was afraid for the kids, for what might happen if I didn't take control. I hope one day you can forgive me for some of the extremes I went to." Emily gave a sad smile. That was perhaps the closest he'd come to acknowledging the pain he'd caused her in return. "I forgave you already," she said. "I had to move forward. And I hope, maybe someday, you might forgive me too." Michael was silent for a moment. Then he nodded slowly. "I'm working on it," he said, honesty in his tone. "I can't promise I'll ever forget it, or that things could ever be like they were. But I don't hate you. I don't want to hate the mother of my children. I want you to be okay, and I want us to be good parents, even if on separate paths." A single tear escaped down Emily's cheek, but she was smiling. "That's more than I deserve, probably, but I'm grateful." They finished their champagne. A burst of applause came from the stage. One of the single moms who'd been helped by New Start was sharing her success story at the microphone, and the crowd was moved. Emily and Michael both turned to listen, standing together in mutual support of the woman's journey. When the brief speech ended, Michael glanced at his watch. "I should get back to the table. They're expecting me to pledge some obscene amount of money during the auction," he said wryly. Emily chuckled. "Then, by all means, go make that donation." He looked at her kindly. "You'll be all right here? When do you finish?" "Late, probably after midnight once cleanup is done." He frowned slightly. "Do you have a ride home?" "I'll catch a cab or subway, it's fine." Michael opened his mouth as if to offer something, perhaps a lift, but then wisely seemed to reconsider. That kind of familiarity was a door better left closed. Instead, he simply said, "Be safe then. I'll see you on Saturday for the new visitation schedule, okay? Why don't we say I drop the girls at your place in the morning and pick them up in the evening? No supervisors, no constraints." Emily's heart did a little leap of joy. That sounds wonderful. They shared one last smile, one parent to another. And then Michael turned and walked back toward the tables, toward the life he now led. Emily watched him go, knowing fully that he would never again be hers, and that was all right. His decisive actions, however painful, had ultimately set them all on a path toward healing. She had lost a marriage, but regained herself. He had won his battle, but without cruelty in the end. This was the price of victory, that they both had to surrender the fantasy of us to secure the well-being of those they loved most. Emily inhaled deeply and returned to her volunteer duties, quietly proud of the woman she was becoming. Under the grand chandeliers of the plaza, surrounded by chatter and music and purpose, she understood at last that some stories don't end with the mending of a broken relationship, but with the growth that comes after. Michael had been right. They would never be together again, and perhaps that was for the best. And in that acceptance, both of them finally found a measure of peace.